By the time River's Edge begins, the murder's already happened. Apart from a brief flashback, the film really isn't interested in shocking us with the killing itself. What really shocks me, and still does nearly 40 years after I first saw it, is just how casually almost everyone reacts afterwards. Welcome back to Dave's Movie Diary. I first saw River's Edge around 1989 or 1990 when I was about 17 or 18 years old. And what stayed with me wasn't the murder itself, it was the reaction. And by that I mean the fact that so many of these teenagers in the film seem more interested in helping the murderer, John, avoid the consequences than showing any real concern for the girl who's been killed. Watching it again all these years later, that is still the aspect that makes the film so disturbing for me. What happens in this film? It's set in a working class suburb in Northern California and opens after the central crime has already taken place. Teenager John has murdered his girlfriend Jamie and just left her naked body casually beside the river. Rather than trying to hide what he's done, he tells his friends matter-of-factly what's happened and then takes them, some of them, to see the body. They don't believe him until they see it for themselves. From that point on, the film is really less interested in solving a crime because we already know who committed it, and is really looking at and examining how a group of teenagers respond to something that they should find unimaginable and horrific. A couple of the teenagers are disturbed. More of them, though, are fascinated or either just emotionally detached from what's happened. And a surprising number quickly start thinking about how to protect the murderer from the consequences rather than focusing on the victim. Matt, played by Keanu Reeves in one of his earliest roles, and Clarissa, played by Ione Skye, are among the few characters who seem to have a normal moral reaction to what's happened. Police start investigating and pressure builds within the group, and then friendships start to fall apart, and then everyone is forced to decide where their loyalty really lies. Complicating matters is Feck, a strange one-legged drug dealer played by Dennis Hopper, who becomes involved with John and the group. He's a bit of an unpredictable character, but strangely, he might just be one of the few adults who truly understands the seriousness of what's happened. Rather than becoming a conventional crime thriller, River's Edge becomes a disturbing portrait of teenage alienation, but above all, neglect, and shows a generation of young people who just seem to have been left to raise themselves. Like I said, I first saw this film as a teenager, basically the same age as the characters in this film, and it was the perfect age to see it, I think. I remember the reason I saw it was because it got a good rating in one of those Leonard Maltin film guides that I used to have and highlight movies that I've seen, and then I started a watch list. I used to type out this watch list of films to look for at the video store. And then the video store back then used to have a printout of all the films that it had in its catalogue in the store. And I used to highlight that as well. So from an early age, I was really trying to save myself time. Though I did enjoy walking around looking at all the covers of the VHS cassettes. So this one stood out. By the time I got to it a few years after it came out, watched it, and it shocked me. And if I wanted to put my finger on it now, it would have been a sense of nihilism. That's this idea that these teenagers could witness something so horrific, the aftermath of it, and just react with such indifference, like it was no big deal. Coming back to it now, that feeling still exists. If anything, the film feels even more uncomfortable because the behaviour around the murder seems so believable. The crime is shocking, but the reaction is what stays with you. And I think there's still elements in our society now where this sort of thing has been the hype factor around it has become commonplace, and violence is accepted now. I did start to think too, the river, the place, it really is a place where tragedy happens. Um, and I think it's always been that way. It's always been a powerful symbol in art and storytelling. I think it's become a place connected with loss and broken relationships and tragedy and things that can't be recovered. And it reminded me of other things in my culture. Bruce Springsteen's song, The River, even Richard Marx's Hazard, where the film clip and the song take place at a river. Beyond that, Nick Cave's song, it was actually a duet with Kylie Minogue in the mid-90s, Where the Wild Roses Grow. I think there was that Pearl Jam song as well from the late 90s, mid to late 90s. I can't recall what it was called. But again, where the river is a place of tragedy and teenage mistakes or romances that have gone wrong. And in River's Edge, the river really becomes almost a silent witness to more than one murder. It's a beautiful natural place that instead becomes connected forever with something terrible. Tim Hunter directed this one. Before this film, he'd made Tex in 1982 with Matt Dillon. That, I think, was based on a novel by S.E. Hinton. She also wrote The Outsiders, Rumblefish, quite a few other novels that were set in that mid to late teenage range that really captured that age quite well. After River's Edge, he went on to really make his mark in TV. He directed a few episodes here and there of shows like Twin Peaks and Mad Men, Breaking Bad, even Deadwood. All great shows. I feel like Tim Hunter never really inserts himself into this film. The performances and the story are compelling enough, so it's quite a controlled directing style. He never turns the murder into really entertainment and avoids sensationalism. The horror in this film for me comes from just observing these teenagers and allowing their behavior to speak for itself. It's not even so much what's said, it's just the looks on their faces. And watching it again last night, the film nearly feels like a documentary about a generation that's lost its connection to having normal emotions. The music stood out to me as well, which is a real sound of 1986 in these sort of communities. I could relate to it. It's a huge part of why the film takes me back to 1986. The guys in particular walking around with heavy metal t-shirts and the denim jackets with the cut off arms, the music itself and the attitudes. It's really the world that these kids belong to. And the tracks in the movie by bands like Slayer, Agent Orange, Fate's Warning really set it in that mid-80s time period. Just took me back to my own teenage years. Never had the denim jacket. Definitely had the heavy metal t-shirts though. Metallica, Motley Crue, AC/DC to name a few. And the music doesn't just sit in the background. It represents the generation, and it's something that never leaves you. I've still got fond memories of that music, and it's like a photo album. It takes me back. Keanu Reeves, as I said, he's the moral center in this film. His character Matt, he's part of a broken home. A young mother who seems to be only a few years older, who's with a guy who doesn't really care much for her two sons and at least one daughter who's younger as well. Kind of reminded me of Fish Tank, the setting in that film as well, where the mother isn't that much older than the kids, and in this case is trying to be a nurse as well, so she's never there. So the kids end up looking after themselves and kind of running riot in this story anyway. So Keanu Reeves before this film, he was in Youngblood the same year, which I've which I remember quite well too with Rob Lowe. He was still a couple of years away from really breaking out. Bill and Ted's was 89. Point Break, and My Own Private Idaho were 91. And then Speed in 94. And, the Keanu show was off and running. It was fascinating seeing him at this early age. And there's moments in this where he nearly feels like a serious version of the Bill and Ted persona. That sort of unmistakable Keanu walk that he has and the run. He's still got that innocence and naivety, and it works perfectly here for this character. So I do think he's really well cast, puts in a really strong performance as the moral center of the film. He's one of the few people in this film who reacts the way that we would expect normal, in inverted commas, to act. He understands from the get-go that something terrible has happened, and he's sickened by it. And from that moment on, he starts to distance himself from some of his friends. Ione Skye, she's the other voice of reason, and obviously known quite well from the film Say Anything in 1989. She gives this film another important perspective, I think, from the female point of view. One of the few who refuses to accept the group's behavior as normal, and brings a certain vulnerability and humanity to a film that's really lacking it, on purpose, of course. Dennis Hopper. In this one, he's more than the crazy guy. It was an interesting period for him too. What an 86 he had. He puts out this Blue Velvet, which really just kickstarted his career, and people saw him in a new light, maybe remembered him as well. And also he was in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Interesting year that he had. Major comeback period. He'd been out really down and out due to drugs and alcohol. It had gotten on top of him in the early 80s, and these films in 86, especially Blue Velvet, of course, represented a real comeback. And he went on to have a really strong late 80s, early 90s, and teamed up with Keanu Reeves again in Speed. On the surface, his character Feck in this one starts out like another weird Dennis Hopper character that we've come to expect. But we find out there's a lot more going on. There's a lot of regret and sadness in this character. And the interesting thing to me was that even someone as damaged and unstable as Feck still seems more emotionally aware than many of the teenagers, because he understands that something terrible has happened. It reminds him of what he did when he was young as well. And he plays a critical part in the plot later on. Crispin Glover. He was in Back to the Future the year before this, and then afterwards he'd pop up. I remember him in Wild at Heart, What's Eating Gilbert Grape. He was Andy Warhol in The Doors. Always an oddball. You can't ignore him. He always brings this bizarre, unpredictable energy to the film. He's got this lisp. His eyes are quite opaque. He's really weird and unusual. At first, I found this character fascinating. Just completely disconnected from normal behavior, trying to become part of the drama. Really inserts himself in the situation. Got to say though, after a while, I really found his performance a bit too much, and way too theatrical than everyone else. And I don't know whether that was his decision and Tim Hunter just went with it, or whether that was the idea from the get-go. But it did weaken some of the impact for me after a while. One of the most disturbing parts of the film, though, isn't even John. Played by Daniel Roebuck in a quite scary performance too. The way his eyes just peer out at the world without any seeming sense of remorse or emotion. And he's a big guy too. He's got a lot of power in that body. He's deserving enough, but I felt it was Keanu's younger brother and his friend, who are like 12 years old. These two are really showing signs of the same emotional emptiness and worse. Stealing cars, driving around, manipulating people and situations, and fanning the violence, being fascinated by the violence. And that really is the biggest warning sign in this film at the time, I think, is that the problem's bigger than one person. It's cyclical, and it's being passed down unknowingly to the next generation, due to the absence of parents, I guess, in a sort of a community that's really taken its eyes off the ball. I do subscribe to that theory that everyone's raised by a village. Well, the village in River's Edge is non-existent, and worse than that, it's actually a really bad influence. There's a definite lack of adult supervision here. Even when they're there, they're not really there. They're worried about their own life. Keanu's mum in this film basically gives up at one point, just can't handle it. There's no guidance, there's no oversight. Even when the parents talk about it, they just end up yelling at each other. So the teenagers are existing in their own world and growing up without boundaries or attention or support or discipline, and we get these consequences. Very sobering. I don't think it's a date film. It's too bleak. You're staring at this naked body with its face turning blue and a broken neck, or a crushed larynx at the very least. It's very stark, very uncomfortable, I think. If you can create a romantic connection from this film, I'm worried about you. For the same reasons, it's not a hangover film. It's too heavy emotionally. It's too unsettling. You don't need this after a big night. It's probably a watch alone when you're up to it. It affected me these ways. Maybe other folks didn't take it so much to heart, but I do think that's what the film's aiming at, and it worked on me. So probably need to sit with it, get the message, and then watch a comedy or something. It's pretty heavy going, I thought, especially in those early scenes. So coming back to it nearly 40 years after first seeing it, I think the film's power comes from the same place that it always did, which is, yes, it's a shocking murder, random, senseless, really. She allegedly said something about John's mother. She's been dead for a while. And he just nearly kills her to see what it's like. I don't know. He never really explains it properly. That's beyond him. But it's the reaction to the murder is really what makes it unforgettable. Performances are fantastic for the most part. Keanu grounds it, along with Ione Skye. They're the conscience. Dennis Hopper brings an unexpected depth to the film. Daniel Roebuck is convincing as John. Crispin Glover, it's one of the strangest performances. Like I said, it didn't really work for me after a while. So look, it's not a perfect movie. The tone is a bit uneven at times. And yeah, Glover's performance seems to be nearly deliberately extreme. But as a portrait of teenage alienation and emotional numbness, it's very powerful. So yeah, worth checking out. Good running time as well. Doesn't outlast its welcome. So yeah, it does remain one of the most unsettling films about teenage alienation ever made, with the murder just being the starting point. So yeah, it's still disturbing and and sadly still relevant, I think. So yeah, that's it. River's Edge from 1986. Hope you found this pod interesting, and thanks as always for listening. See you next time.